a single cubicle among many on the 7th floor of a massive office complex that housed the corporate headquarters of a Fortune 500 company. All chance of promotion or upward mobility appeared impossible and a distant dream. Yet here I was searching the internet and researching business proposals and trends that earn a high-level promotion. I had always stayed late looking for ways to shave costs and make myself a valuable and non-expendable asset, while my listless co-workers would most likely vegetate at home in complicit mediocrity. I remained here, looking for any advantage that would show that I stood out from the rest of the dead-enders. I occasionally glanced at the empty cubicles around me. The current silence did not reflect the hectic ongoings of the earlier third of the day. By this time the sun descended and the room's emptiness grew with each shading tint and elongation of shadow. This growing darkness increasingly devoured everything in the room except for the light coming from my workstation. I became sidetracked with worry and frustration, occasionally looking up every 10 minutes at the security cameras and those soulless jet black bulbs poking out of the ceiling tile. I wondered if they were there for security or just to keep an eye on the room's occupants. Maybe someone up there noticed me in my struggle to ascend. At least I hoped somehow I higher up would see the effort I put forth every day and night. The bell from an ancient downtown church chimed the hour, and the sound became muffled and even ominous against the high glass structure. I tried to block out the distractions, both from the empty room and the outdoors. The chime unnerved me. These sounds seemed eternal, and in the 3 years that I had been here, I could never get used to it. Some things stayed the same and other things changed without indication. I knew this. Thought about it every time in the busy day that I glanced at my inept coworker. As an effect of the burgeoning global economy, the company was undergoing change and possible layoffs. But this change would not affect the ones that could adapt, evolve, and separate themselves from the rest. Promise! What I hoped the corporation saw in me. That young James Hawkins would be a valuable asset in the next few years. Unfortunately, this promise had been lost on my mother-in-law. Bad enough that she would be the first to greet me at the door now that she stayed over with Jessica for the last month of the pregnancy. Her demeanor had been calm enough, standing in the doorway with a welcoming smile but giving a discreet glance towards my collar. Once inside, she inquired about my day, along with the after hours I worked, in order to catch me in a lie. So I endured her suspicions for another evening. Once getting past her, I had to deal with Jessica. Honey, this extra work will pay off. I'm chasing a hot lead, that's all I can tell you. What about the things here that need to be done? When your son comes, are you going to be here to greet him? Believe in me, this will pay off in the long run. Besides, we have a month and I'll finish the nursery. No response, only a frustrated sigh from her. I too grew frustrated and was at the point of snarking about how it wasn't like we needed the money for any reason, but I relaxed and focused on the sale. Don't you want that life we always dreamed of? I said, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. It won't be that long. Have some faith in me, okay? I crawled into bed beside her. Now my attempts to kiss her were greeted with complaints about her aching back and swelling ankles. During the night, Jessica cried about how I didn't understand her and wasn't taking her feelings into account. But it came down to this. I'd rather be at work earning the much-needed money than doing the things that she used to do. Hell, her mother was here for that. After doing my best job to console her, I did everything she needed done before I went to bed. Already sleep-starved, I managed only a few hours. I fell asleep thinking about that fragile life depending on me to provide for the future. Instead of the joy of fatherhood, I feared the possibility of losing my job. Rising from my bed, I felt the moist spot in my briefs. A release of frustration. I thought about how long it had been since my wife and I had done anything. She now was never in the mood, plus the extra weight gain and bloating turned me off. I had to find a solution. I just put all my energy into my work. As I got dressed, I remembered back to one morning when I was 5 and had put on my dad's shoes, something all kids did, no doubt. My toes clenched the front of his loafers and the heels flopped up on the back of my ankles. My father walked in, fastening the last button of his sports coat. He saw me and laughed. One day, but I think I need them more than you do. I looked at his proud face as he picked me up and put me on his shoulders, including me in a pretend work routine. I knew he wouldn't drop me. He held on to me with wrapped hands around my legs. We were having fun until he looked up at the big wooden grandfather clock in the living room. Sorry, son. In the fervent rush to work, I'd come back to that memory on mornings like these, and when I did, I would resolve to be that man for my son, a strong adult who could carry him and his hopes and aspirations on my shoulders in order to see and enjoy everything that I couldn't. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door only to meet Jessica's mother at the threshold. Are you going to be late again tonight? Yes, unfortunately. I'd love to have job security enough so I would not have to come home to this every night. The woman didn't like me, true enough, but I wonder how different she'd treat me if I were a high-salaried executive. Listen, if you need the money, I'm sure your father-in-law would be happy to give you. I better get going, I said, interrupting her. She said in validation of her earlier suspicion. As I walked away at a brisk pace, I thought I heard her mumble something about my needing a chastity belt. I definitely wanted to go to work. The morning went like any other day of the week. Voices chattered, phones rang, and paper shuffled along. As usual, I sat in the middle doing everything I could not to impede the invoices, memos, and the millions of predetermined electrical pulses running through this wired maze of cubicles. I occasionally looked up at the others from my own desk, but continued to stay busy, doing my best to ignore the constant distractions of the ongoing chatter. At other times, I thought about my job as a sales rep and my position with this international insurance company, and then began to daydream about a future where I'd be a higher up. Sometimes I'd be interrupted by all the small talk that I didn't want to hear. For the sake of going along and keeping up appearances, I participated at a minimal level. All of these unnecessary distractions, the ladies talking about their sometime goofy or moronic husbands, or the men discussing yesterday's ball game. Altogether, they only focused on the weekend or possibly the upcoming summer. Nothing further, as if dazed and hammered down into their desk chairs. So how's the family, Derek, my supervisor, asked me out of the blue. We're fine. My son's going to arrive in less than a month. Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. Congratulations. He patted me on the shoulder before going over the day's sales figures. I pictured a giant eye gazing at the workers, evaluating us through performance sheets and glances into our lives. The all-seeing eye that made decisions on who should stay and who should go, and who should be elevated. This was the way it had to be. Business evolves. Stone and brick become glass and steel, and the workers are just the material to make this all happen. No room allowed for personal feelings. Who knew when the next evolution would begin? Maybe the company would relocate its lower-level jobs to some country most Americans have never heard of. This possibility did not bother me. I knew an organization must shed its skin in order to survive. The only thing you could really do is convince the organization that they needed you more than you needed them. I hoped that someone looked at me from those cameras and saw my worth, even from a simple glance. I stayed late at the company another night. I reflected on lunch I had after work with a higher-up named William Emmitt. We went out to a not-too-expensive restaurant where the food was of no concern, only the waitresses. Always my treat. He got a free meal and I got inside information and established good relations with a man 2 levels higher than I. I figured something was wrong when he ordered his third drink while I still nursed my first. I had known him the entire time at the company, and the longer I knew him, the more he took in. He sat there quietly, and instead of listening to his problems like I should have, I went into mine in great detail. Damn it, she must have missed her pill one day. Maybe she did it on purpose, I then added after a sip. Hey, it's a sign of manhood. He remained silent while hovering over his nearly empty scotch glass. I mean, don't get me wrong, I continued. I want to be a father, but not till I establish some sort of security. She wants it, though. I know, don't give me that crap about how it's supposed to be the biggest joy in my life. I know that, but not right now. I just want to feel secure enough to raise a child when I make as much as you do. I then tried to make light of the situation, suggesting, maybe I'm mad because I haven't gotten any lately. Besides, with her being as fat as she is, I'd probably fall out of the bed. He didn't respond. Instead, he finished off his drink. While he did this, the top portion of his gut shook. Besides his age, he looked older than the protruding lines on his forehead. As if not listening to anything I said, he looked up and called for the waitress, a girl who looked as if she were working her way through college. He always flirted with the women who waited on us. This time he kept quiet, though, only ordering another drink. Mr. Milton will announce plans tomorrow to pass control over to his son. You know the kind. One of those little pricks with a Harvard degree who's just hoping to make a name for himself. Under his orders, the company could ship most of the white-collar jobs to Thailand. He stopped for the dramatic effect of these words. They're going to find someone there that can do the job for half the money. They got intelligent people over there. They just ask for less money and work in subhuman conditions. Sometimes a volcano or a tsunami hits them, but they just rebuild their huts before they go to work. He paused again, suddenly redirecting his anger. Do you think anybody understands that here? Someone in a bad mood gets a mental health day. We must deserve to lose our jobs. About to cry, he stopped talking when the waitress showed up and took away his glass, asking if he needed anything else. Emmitt didn't look at her, but I looked at her green eyes while smiling and thinking about the undone top button of her work shirt. No, I think my friend and I will be fine. Her smile widened a bit in sympathy, but also in slightly intrigued admiration. She then said she would return with our checks. My attention returned to Emmitt. He checked his watch and acted as if he had somewhere else to be. Then he gobbled up the remaining food on his plate and downed the water provided at the table. I wanted to say a comforting word, but what could I tell him that wouldn't make me sound like a conceited little punk? Now I had to forget about him and make sure I could survive. So I stayed late at the office, trying to think of some way to avoid being part of the downsized masses. Not that I actually had any ideas of how to combat these layoffs, but I didn't want to go home. What I needed to figure out was how the company could find a niche in a burgeoning low-risk demographic that would pay off in high interest yields. The old business cliche. Profit was the bottom line. It was the only reason we did anything. Know this and you'd have a chance. But I was outside my expertise, plus all the time I nodded off and I could barely stay awake. When I managed to be alert, I thought and worried of my shaky and insecure life. In less than a month, I would welcome my son to what could be an empty future. I'm sure I could find other work, but I would have to start in the same position and then wait for an opportunity to get a promotion. But my son would need money now. So how was I going to do this? I couldn't just admit to myself that there was no escape. I could only stare at a blank computer screen as if chained to it, waiting for vultures to pick me apart. My thoughts turned to my wife. She too was trapped, but in her case it's a mound of flesh that keeps her from being her. Every time I came near her, she got more nauseated than usual, and then at other times, I left the room because of her crying. She hardly resembled the woman I married. I had to help her over to the bathroom because of her swollen ankles, her polyhydramniosed stomach hanging down, taxing her back. Not just her back, but my entire life. The doctor said she needed to be on bed rest for the remainder of her pregnancy. And what was I supposed to do with all this pent-up energy in the meantime? It doesn't sustain me enough to go into the bathroom, wad up some bathroom tissue, and think about some waitress I saw for half an hour of the day. After struggling through all these and many other frustrations, my thoughts went straight to lunch and that waitress's breast. Jessica had been a waitress herself once. Tight waist, a quarter of her shirt unbuttoned, she showed enough to make the sophisticated customers notice. Sure, I flirted with her, saying meaningless things. The words themselves didn't matter, only the feeling of the moment. I felt rejuvenated just thinking about the old her. I still lusted over that tight waist and those tremendous legs. I had slipped her my number. She then called me, and I took her that night when she got off work. We danced around in my apartment and acted like teenagers, smiling and giggling before we went to bed. When I thought of that Jessica, I realized that my marriage had been based more on conquering my lust. She got something in exchange for it, too. She saw a promising young man in a posh business suit, and together we formed empty symbols of status, beauty, and power. Back then, there were the breasts of that once young girl with that smile of hope. Now all of that was gone, and all that remained was a woman who became sick at the sight of me. She had lost all that grace and loveliness. What would she be like when the baby arrived? Would she become only a withered shell? I didn't have another choice but to endure. I had to try for those jobs that are not expendable, those safe places on the corporate ladder where you fear nothing in the way of job cuts, no matter how shaky the present. To land is to become. I wanted to become. All the downtown bells and clocks in the world could then chime but lose their power. It would be freedom outside of any worries, and all I needed was an opportunity to show the top brass my worth. Still, the news of possible layoffs had affected my ability to concentrate. Already drowsy from the little sleep I had, I thought back to when my mother had called to tell me that the disease had advanced faster than the doctors thought and that my father only had a short time. I did have a few weeks left in the semester, and I wanted, with my father's blessing, to remain in school. Achievement takes precedent over everything else. That's what he always told me. After I finished my exams, I headed home for the last days. To this day, I have nightmares when I first saw him in that condition. He would look better during his funeral than he did that day. I was not with him when he died. How could I be? I could only stand to look at him in his debilitated state for only a few moments. When I did see him, he asked me if I kept up with my schoolwork, and I mumbled only a few syllables of obedient affirmation. In that stale air which you could swear that you could smell his disease, hung all the things that we didn't say. He managed to smile with hope of the near future. All the pain he experienced would be eclipsed by my success. At least that was what he wanted me to believe. Also tried to convince himself of that. That night, after falling asleep on my keyboard, I dreamt I had his disease. I sat in the middle of my cubicle watching the people move around me. They started moving faster around and through their work areas. No one noticed me as I slowly lost all use of my limbs. By the time I realized I should scream out for help, I could no longer talk. Then, as they moved around even faster, I was no longer there. "Mr. Hawkins!" I looked up from the top of my desk to see the company's president standing over me. With his hands clenched behind his back, he bent over my desk until he hovered an inch away from my face. The bags below his somewhat jaundiced eyeballs appeared to slowly engulf them, looking like a pale and wrinkled serpent swallowing a see-through embryo. He had a frown accompanied with an expression of curiosity, and if I didn't fear his superior position, I would have snickered at his comical attempt at earnestness. "Mr. Milton, I must have dozed off," I said, breaking the silence. "That is not important right now. Just come with me." He turned his back to me and walked towards the doorway. Alarmed, I got up and followed him, wondering why he knew my name. He had never been to this part of the office, but I knew who he was partly from this portrait on the company's website. The old man looked back towards me, only turning his left shoulder and head. I continued to stare at him from my desk. "Come on, Hawkins. You have nothing to fear from me. You have only to gain from what I have to show you." He led me through all the dark office space that now sat quiet and empty. I could only follow, wondering if I was really awake. In that white, tepid light from the glow of the outside city, he suddenly looked older than he did a moment earlier. His wrinkled face became more pronounced, and even his stature looked smaller. When we rode down the elevator, he did not look nor speak to me. I, taking his cue, remained silent and looked ahead. Finally, we came to a door at the end of the hall past the lower floor's mailroom and the fenced-in maintenance section. I wanted to crack a joke about how we had descended lower than any employee would have ever wanted to, but I kept that to myself. He pulled out a tarnished set of keys from his business jacket and unlocked a panel that creaked on its hinges, opening up to an electronic control pad. He then punched in a series of numbers, rapidly moving his fingers, much faster than someone his age should have been able to move them. When the vault flew open with a small jolt of electricity, I had to shield my eyes from the bright incandescence reflecting out of the completely white room. With my pupils shrinking, I could make out a door on the other side of it. Mr. Milton walked over and stood next to that door, looking at me with his hands now clasped in front of him. "You should take this as a sign of a promotion, Hawkins. Only a select few know of this location. The origin of the room behind me is unknown. It precedes my father's founding of the company and has existed since this building was a turn-of-the-century prison. It survived the wrecking ball and countless other attempts to destroy it. I sometimes think the office complex is only an addition to this room." He stepped towards me with such expected, vibrant determination as if to pounce on me and swallow me whole. I remained silently in place, becoming a bit fearful for the old man's sanity. It's always dark in there. Even the light from this room does not enter it. Complete darkness. You can look in the dark, some even walk into it. I did once, years ago. What is this room, sir? I added the sir even though I was unsure whether I still had to address him as a superior. This marked a sudden change to his body language. The old man widened his eyes as if I had relieved him of some heavy load. He showed his teeth emphatically in an answer. Revelation. He stood silent for the moment. Within the sharply lighted place, he resembled St. Peter at the gate in an oversized business suit. I didn't know why I stood there, but I was too scared and intrigued to move. You see something when you reach the middle. If there even is a middle, you seem to be standing at a mirror or a window. It's all very odd and indescribable until you see it for yourself. I looked into it and I can never be absolutely sure what I saw. Every time I tried to look through it, I saw an object mixed with my own reflection, and both combined into something strange. I couldn't see any other color or boundary. The room seems to be encapsulated in nothingness, but the dark seems to be something too, as if it is something alive. As you get older, you sometimes reflect back upon that experience and gain a new understanding. At least I do now believe I know, as if time and space became one to form a complete revelation about my life. One so intense and powerful that I can never be certain I grasp its meaning entirely. The question is how to account for any possible discrepancy. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to leave and return to the office where I'd awake, but I couldn't move. In all my fear and confusion, I asked him one thing. What am I here for, sir? Because I need a witness, someone to understand what I cannot see. You are my hope for objectivity. To understand what he could not see, he looked like an old man who spent most of his time in his penthouse suite drinking 12-year-old scotch and finally succumbed to senility as a result of boredom. I wanted to leave, but my skepticism was undone by his authority and my curiosity to see what was behind that door. What do you want me for? I want you to go in for me. You were the age I was when I last walked in there. I need someone to witness the room and give me insight. I'm not going in there. He smiled with teeth that now looked rotten in this blinding light. Then he spoke. I'm sure you are familiar with the talk of our company changing. It is true. Many will be left behind, losing any chance for a secure future, except for those select few, those who stand above the common games and cowardice of others. No matter how drastic these cuts are, we will always have room in our top offices for someone willing to show initiative and bravery, he told me. Then he grinned. It's an easy choice to make. Never worry about feeding your family again, or endure an uncertain future like the rest of the cattle. How long will I have to be in there? You'll know when to leave. All it requires is seeing. Everything around me looked distorted. The room's emptiness and brightness only heightened this feeling. As I looked at the door next to where he stood, nothing seemed real, and neither did my response. I wondered if I should play along with my dreams, but given the surreal nature of this experience, I didn't know what else I should do. I moved over to the door where he waited for me. Before pulling open the completely white door, he looked back at me with a deadly smile. I now had to see what that room contained. If real, then I would finally have shown my willingness not just to any one of the top brass, but to the president himself. I had to treat this as the most important test of my life. Through here? I imagined to ask, even though my body, which was moving towards the entrance, had decided for me. When he pulled the door all the way open, I saw no mixing of light from the outer room with the jet blackness within, nor did there appear to be any light in the doorway when I entered. After walking a little bit, I turned back and saw that the light of the other room remained on the lit side as if it were forbidden to enter. How could this be? Since it lacked any actual boundary, I couldn't even tell how far away it was. But I continued to go ahead, unsure of any direction in this room. Only after a few random and directionless steps did I finally see something ahead of me. Somehow, in this darkness, a window or a mirror showed through in the middle of this vacuum of empty space. I felt propelled towards the mirror and walked over to peer into it. But how could I see anything without a light source? How could I even see a mirror? No longer questioning anything, I gazed into the mirror and found my reflection without the aid of any light source. I continued to gaze into it. Then my flesh of my reflection began to liquefy. It grew heavier to the point that it started to grow on top of my mirrored self. I watched horrified as a black mass of tissue grew until it completely covered me and broke the rest of me down into a formless mass of glowing blackness, having destroyed every last semblance of what I once was, only to reform into a much smaller silhouette. I knew then that I had received my revelation, and frozen until that time, I screamed and ran out of the room, barely seeing my way, but knowing instinctively where to go. When I reached the outside, I fell panting into the old man's arms. He held me firmly and placed his hand underneath my chin in a soft but solemn gesture. He lifted my head until our eyes met. I let out a gasping scream to him. "My child will devour me!" He only looked at me and nodded in grim affirmation. I started to cry, and looking into his understanding eyes, I felt the blood start to leave my head. I woke up to the flickering glow from the fluorescent bulb above my workstation. I stood up with a jolt and looked over to the office windows. How did I get back here? I could only guess that what had happened before had to have taken place in some sort of odd sensory deprivation chamber that took advantage of my susceptible and tired mind, and I must have drunkenly stumbled back to my desk. Then again, I could have dreamt it all. I knew one thing, whether a dream or not, I recognized it as true. In that room, I had witnessed the destruction of myself. A short time, Mr. Edward Milton would step down, giving his son full power. This event happened all over the world in both small and large scales. The young and powerful would devour the old and the sick. All of this in order to suppress the inevitable destruction of their own lives. I had done the same to my father, and my son would do it to me. Everyone will destroy everyone else so that they can scale the mountain and proclaim themselves God. Without any idea where I was going, I resolved to leave. I didn't even care to answer the phone that had started ringing at my desk. I figured it might be Mr. Milton, but I no longer cared. The job was unimportant. But in the rush of oncoming reality, I thought about that never-ending darkness I had witnessed. With the anxiety of giving up what I worked so hard to attain, I picked up the phone. Too late. Whoever called left no recording on my voicemail. Was this my missed opportunity? I remained at my desk and wondered if he could call again. If he had called at all. After 20 minutes of relentless staring at the phone, it finally rang. On the first ring, I thrust the receiver to my ear in expectation, only to hear my wife's voice. She had wondered where I had been during the night. I could hear her mother's disapproving voice off in the distance. I had to relax and reassure her. "Honey, can I talk to you later? I'm expecting a call." "What's going on with you?" "I can't talk right now. I have to call you back, please." "What's wrong? Why won't you talk to me now?" "I just can't right now. I'll call you back later." "What's going on with you?" "I want you to stay on this phone and talk to me." "Damn it, Jessica, what do you want from me? Can't you think about what I'm going through for once? I try to be everything everyone wants, and it's destroying me." I paused. I felt the adrenaline rush from my anger, but I could hear her crying on the other end, so I had no choice but to gain my composure and calm down. "Look, I know things are rough right now, but they'll get better after I receive an important phone call. I promise. Listen again. Please have faith in me, okay?" She answered with a half-hearted yes, and then I ended the conversation. "I'll talk to you when I get home. I love you." I hung up the phone, hoping that he hadn't called while I talked to her. I wondered if he would call at all, or had I dreamt this insanity. I wanted to go to Mr. Milton's office suite, but it would seem out of character. Who knows, maybe he would call while I was gone. Worse off, it might have been some cruel joke he and the other executives play on their employees. I looked up in fear as if being laughed at from above and wondered who watched me from behind the security camera. Maybe they all were waiting for me to return to the basement, where I would be greeted with ridicule and mockery. I could hear the clock chiming from the distant church through my window. 9 o'clock. People started coming in, all unaware of their hopeless future, too distant from their cares. Yet none of these people noticed me. I wanted to yell out from my area to the others, but could not. I feared them now as I feared my own future. I remained frozen by the things to come, still watching the phone while the fear and despair began to metastasize through my body. I stared forever at the phone, doubting everything I ever believed, but still giving a paralyzed prayer to the God of my own creation.